After 12 years of keeping my wife and me away from our son, my daughter-in-law invited us to visit them in Chicago. When we arrived, we found the house empty. That's when a neighbor shouted, "They've been in jail for 7 years." When I asked why, I froze. Subscribe to the channel for more stories like this and comment the city you're watching from. The phone rang at 7 in the morning on a Wednesday, slicing through the quiet of our kitchen like a knife. Linda was pouring her second cup of coffee, and I was reading the sports section when that familiar number flashed on the caller ID, a number we hadn't seen in 12 years. Jessica. My hands shook as I reached for the phone. Linda's eyes met mine across the table, and I saw the same mix of hope and fear swirling in my gut. "Larry." Jessica's voice was softer than I remembered, almost fragile. "It's me. It's Jessica." I cleared my throat, searching for words buried under a dozen years of silence. "Jessica, this is unexpected. I know it's been a long time." There was a pause, and I could hear her breathing on the other end. "Larry, Michael wants to see you. Both of you." The word struck me like a punch. Michael, my son, the boy I'd taught to throw a football, to drive a manual car, to tie his shoes, the man who vanished from our lives the moment he said, "I do." "He wants to see us," I repeated, and Linda dropped her coffee mug. It shattered on the kitchen floor, but neither of us moved to clean it up. "Yes. He's been talking about you and Linda a lot lately, about how much he misses you both." Jessica's voice cracked slightly. "We're in Chicago now. Michael has been doing really well with his career, and we have this beautiful house in Lincoln Park. He keeps saying, 'The house feels empty without family.'" I pressed the phone tighter to my ear, afraid I might be dreaming. "Jessica, it's been 12 years. 12 years of nothing. No calls, no visits, no holiday cards. You told us we were too controlling, that we needed to give you space. I know, and I'm sorry about that. I was young and scared, and I thought I knew what was best for our marriage." She paused again. "But Michael never stopped loving you. He talks about the garage you two built together, about the camping trips. He wants his children to know their grandparents. Children." My heart nearly stopped. "We have grandchildren, 2 wonderful kids. Sophia is 9, and little Oliver just turned 6. They look just like Michael did at their age." Jessica's voice grew warmer. "Sophia has your eyes, Larry, that same serious expression you get when you're focused." I had to sit down. Linda was staring at me, tears already streaming down her face. She'd heard enough to understand. "Why now?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "After all this time, why are you calling now?" Jessica was quiet for a long moment. "Because life is short, Larry. Too short for this kind of separation." Michael realized that success doesn't mean anything if you don't have family to share it with. "We want to fix this. We want to try again." The rational part of my mind, the part that had been hurt before, whispered warnings. But the father in me, the grandfather who'd never held his grandchildren, drowned out every doubt. When I asked, "This weekend, I know it's short notice, but Michael is between projects right now, and the kids are on spring break from school. It would be perfect timing." I looked at Linda, who was nodding so vigorously. I thought she might strain her neck. We'd been married for 45 years, and I could read her face like a book. She was terrified and hopeful and desperate all at once. "Okay," I heard myself saying, "we'll come." Jessica let out what sounded like a sigh of relief. "Oh, Larry, you don't know how happy this makes me. Michael is going to be thrilled." She gave me an address in Lincoln Park, a nice area from what I remembered of Chicago. We arranged for Saturday afternoon, giving us time to make the 8-hour drive from Detroit. After I hung up, Linda and I sat in silence for a long time, staring at each other across the broken coffee mug. "You think it's real?" she finally asked. "You think they really want us there?" I wanted to say yes. I wanted to believe that my son had finally come to his senses, that Jessica had realized what she'd cost all of us. But 12 years of hurt doesn't heal with one phone call. "I don't know," I admitted. "But we have to try. If there's even a chance." Linda nodded, already reaching for her purse. "I need to go shopping. I need to buy presents for the children." "Oh, God." "Larry, we have grandchildren." The rest of the week passed in a blur of preparation and anxiety. Linda bought enough toys and clothes to fill a small store, insisting that she had 9 and 6 years of birthdays and holidays to make up for. I found myself digging through old photo albums, looking for pictures of Michael as a child to show to Sophia and Oliver. The night before we left, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the last time I'd seen my son at their wedding 12 years ago. He'd looked so happy, so in love. Jessica had been beautiful in her white dress, charming and gracious to all our friends and family. I remembered thinking that maybe I'd been wrong about her, that maybe the tension I'd sensed during their engagement was just pre-wedding nerves. But then came the gradual pulling away. First, they were too busy to visit for Linda's birthday. Then, Michael couldn't make it to my retirement party because of work. Holidays became a phone call that grew shorter each year, until even those stopped. When we tried to visit them in their first apartment, Jessica always had an excuse. Michael was working late, or they had other plans, or she wasn't feeling well. Every attempt at connection was met with a polite but firm rejection. The final blow came 4 years after the wedding, when I called to invite them for Thanksgiving. Jessica answered, and her voice was cold as ice. "Larry, I think it's time we were honest with each other. Michael and I have been talking, and we feel like you and Linda are too involved in our lives. We need space to build our own family traditions. Jessica, we just want to be part of your lives. We love Michael, and we want to love you, too. Love shouldn't feel like pressure." "Larry, Michael feels guilty every time he talks to you because he knows you disapprove of our choices. It's not healthy for our marriage." I tried to argue, to explain that we'd never meant to make Michael feel guilty about anything. But Jessica was done with the conversation. "We'll call when we're ready. Please don't contact us until then." And that was it. 12 years of silence. But now, lying in bed next to Linda as she slept fitfully, I allowed myself to hope. People change. Priorities shift. Maybe becoming parents had helped Michael and Jessica understand what they'd given up. Maybe we were finally going home. The morning sun was just breaking over the hills as we loaded our car for the drive to Chicago. Our hearts full of cautious hope and 12 years worth of love waiting to be given. The highway stretched ahead of us like a ribbon of possibility, but the silence in our car was thick with unspoken fears. Linda sat beside me, her hands folded tightly in her lap, clutching a small photo album she'd put together the night before. Pictures of Michael from birth to college graduation, a visual timeline of the son we'd lost. What if they've changed their minds? She asked for the third time since we'd left Detroit. What if we get there and they don't want to see us? I reached over and squeezed her hand. Her wedding ring, worn thin after 45 years, caught the morning light. Then, at least we'll know we tried. But inside, I was asking myself the same questions. The call from Jessica had felt almost too good to be true. After 12 years of complete silence, why now? What had really changed? As we drove through the countryside, I found myself remembering the Michael I'd raised, the boy who used to help me in my garage every Saturday, standing on a stool so he could reach the workbench. His small hands would hold the nails while I hammered, his face serious with concentration. "Dad, are you building this right?" he'd ask, peering at my work with those intense blue eyes he'd inherited from my father. "What do you think? Son, does it look right to you?" He'd study whatever project we were working on with the gravity of a master craftsman, then nod solemnly. "It looks perfect." "Dad." Those were the moments I treasured most. Not the football games or the camping trips, though those were wonderful, too. It was the quiet times in the garage, just the two of us creating something together. Michael had real talent with his hands, a natural understanding of how things fit together. I'd always imagined that someday we'd work side by side as adults. Maybe even start a business together, father and son, building something meaningful. Instead, I was driving across the country to meet grandchildren I'd never seen, hoping my son still remembered those Saturday mornings. "Tell me about the call again," Linda said suddenly. "What exactly did Jessica say about the children?" I repeated the conversation as best I could remember, watching Linda's face light up at the mention of Sophia and Oliver. She'd been devastated when we realized we might never be grandparents. All her friends had pictures on their phones, stories about soccer games and dance recitals. Linda had learned to change the subject when the conversation turned to grandchildren, 9 and 6. She murmured, "Sophia's probably in 3rd or 4th grade, and Oliver would be in kindergarten." Jessica said, "Sophia has my eyes." Linda smiled for the first time since we'd started driving. Her father's eyes, that serious look, like she's trying to solve the world's problems. We stopped for lunch in Indianapolis, sitting in a diner booth that reminded me of the place Michael and I used to go after his youth league games. He'd order blueberry pancakes every time, no matter what time of day it was, and tell me about every play of the game while syrup dripped down his chin. "Dad, did you see when I slid into second? Coach Johnson said it was the best slide he'd seen all season." "I saw it, son. You looked like a real ball player out there." The pride in his eyes at my simple words. That's what I missed most, being the person whose approval mattered to him. "Larry." Linda's voice pulled me back to the present. "You're thinking about him again?" I nodded, not trusting my voice. The waitress refilled our coffee cups, and I noticed her name tag said Sophia. A sign, maybe. What if we can't connect with them? Linda asked quietly. The children. I mean, we've missed so much. They don't know us at all. Kids are resilient, I said, trying to convince myself as much as her. And they're Michael's children. There has to be something of him in them. But, privately, I worried about the same thing. What did I know about 9-year-old girls or 6-year-old boys in this day and age, when Michael was their age? We didn't have computers and cell phones and video games. We caught fireflies and built tree forts and played catch until the streetlights came on. Would Sophia and Oliver even be interested in an old man who still preferred books to tablets? The closer we got to Chicago, the tighter the knot in my stomach became. The traffic thickened, and the familiar stress of the city began to seep into our car. Linda pulled out the address Jessica had given us and started navigating. Lincoln Park. She read from her phone. It says here it's a very nice area, expensive. I wasn't surprised. Michael had always been smart, ambitious. In high school, he'd talked about becoming an engineer, designing structures that would outlast him. I'd encouraged those dreams, helped him with his college applications, celebrated when he got into Northwestern. Jessica had been a part of those celebrations. I remembered her at his graduation, beautiful and poised, her arm linked through Michael's as they posed for pictures. She'd seemed genuinely fond of us then, grateful that we'd raised such a wonderful man. When had that changed? When had we become the enemy? Larry. Look. Linda pointed to a road sign. Lincoln Park Drive. We're almost there. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. In a few minutes, I would see my son for the first time in 12 years. I would meet my grandchildren. The moment I'd dreamed about and given up hope for was finally here. But as we turned onto the residential street Jessica had directed us to, something felt wrong. The houses were beautiful, well-maintained, clearly expensive. But there was something unsettling about the quiet, the way the shadows fell across the empty driveways. This is it, Linda said, checking the address against her notes. 2415 Lincoln Park Drive. I pulled into the driveway of a 2-story Victorian with a perfectly manicured lawn. No toys in the yard. No children's bicycles on the porch. No signs of life at all. The windows were dark, and when I looked closer, I could see newspapers piled up by the front door. My heart began to race, but not with excitement anymore. Something was very, very wrong. We sat in the car for a moment, staring at the silent house. Linda's face had gone pale, and I could see her hand shaking. Maybe they're just running late, she whispered, but I knew better. After 68 years on this earth, you develop an instinct for these things. This wasn't a delay or a misunderstanding. This was something else entirely. As I reached for the car door handle, a voice called out from across the street. An elderly man in a gardening hat was waving at us from his front yard. His expression, a mixture of confusion and concern. What he was about to tell us would shatter everything we thought we knew about the last 12 years. Everything we thought we knew about our son. The elderly man shuffled across the street toward us, his weathered face creased with concern. He moved slowly, deliberately, like someone carrying heavy news. Linda and I got out of the car, our legs unsteady after the long drive, and the growing certainty that something terrible was waiting for us. "Excuse me," the man called out, removing his gardening gloves. "Are you folks looking for the Walkers? Michael and Jessica Walker?" My throat went dry. "Yes, we're his parents. Larry and Linda Thompson. We're here to visit." The man's expression shifted from confusion to something that looked almost like pity. He glanced at the empty house, then back at us, clearly struggling with what to say. "I'm sorry, but there's been some kind of mistake," he said gently. "Michael and Jessica haven't lived in that house for years. Not since the police took them away." The world seemed to tilt sideways. Linda grabbed my arm for support, her fingernails digging into my jacket. "Took them away," I repeated, my voice sounding foreign to my own ears. "What do you mean, took them away?" The neighbor, who'd introduced himself as Mr. Thompson, looked increasingly uncomfortable. "I'm sorry to be the one to tell you this, but they were arrested about 7 years ago now. The house has been empty ever since." 7 years. Jessica had called us just 6 days ago. She'd spoken about Michael's career, about the children, about this beautiful house in Lincoln Park. All of it lies. "Arrested for what?" Linda whispered. Though I could tell, part of her didn't want to know the answer. "Mr." Thompson shifted his weight, clearly wishing he were anywhere else. "Drugs. It was a big operation from what I heard. The FBI came with those white vans, took boxes and boxes of evidence out of the house, made the evening news, and everything. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. My Michael, the boy who'd cried when he accidentally stepped on a caterpillar, involved in drugs serious enough to warrant an FBI investigation. There has to be some mistake," I said, but even as the words left my mouth, I knew they sounded hollow. Our son isn't involved in drugs. He's an engineer. He's successful. "Mr." Thompson's face softened with genuine sympathy. "I'm sorry, sir. I lived across the street from them for 4 years before the arrest. Nice enough neighbors kept to themselves mostly. But there was definitely something going on. Strange cars coming and going at all hours. People who didn't look like they belonged in this neighborhood." Linda made a small sound, somewhere between a sob and a gasp. I wrapped my arm around her shoulders, feeling her whole body trembling. "The children," she managed to say. "Jessica told us they had children, Sophia and Oliver." "Mr." Thompson shook his head slowly. "No children, ma'am. Not while they lived here anyway. Just the 2 of them." Another lie. The grandchildren Jessica had described in such vivid detail didn't exist. Sophia with my eyes. Little Oliver, who looked like Michael at that age. All fabrications designed to lure us here. But why? What could Jessica possibly hope to gain by bringing us to Chicago to find an empty house? "Where are they now?" I asked. "Michael and Jessica? Are they still in prison, as far as I know? The trial was a big deal around here. They got convicted on federal charges, so it would be a long sentence. 11, 16 years, maybe more." The numbers crashed over me like cold water. My son, my only child, was in federal prison, had been for 7 years, and I'd never known. "Mr. Thompson," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Do you know which prison, or have any other information about the case?" He scratched his chin thoughtfully. "Well, I saved some of the newspaper clippings from back then. My wife, God rest her soul, she was always cutting out articles about the neighborhood. If you'd like to come inside, I could show you what I have. Linda and I followed Mr. Thompson across the street to his modest bungalow. The living room was cluttered but clean, filled with the kind of furniture that spoke of a long marriage and a comfortable life. He disappeared into a back room and returned with a shoebox full of newspaper clippings. "Here we go," he said, pulling out a yellowed article from the Chicago Tribune. This was the main story when they got arrested. I took the newspaper with shaking hands. The headline read, "Lincoln Park couple arrested in major drug distribution ring." Below it was a photograph that made my knees buckle. It was Michael, my Michael, but not the Michael I remembered. His face was thinner, harder somehow, dark circles under his eyes, a hollow look that spoke of things I didn't want to imagine. He was being led away in handcuffs, his head down, avoiding the cameras. Beside him was Jessica, and she looked nothing like the charming young woman who'd married my son. Her hair was stringy, her clothes disheveled, but it was her eyes that disturbed me most. They were cold, calculating, even in the midst of being arrested. Linda read over my shoulder, her tears dropping onto the newsprint. The article detailed how federal agents had uncovered a sophisticated drug distribution network operating out of several upscale Chicago neighborhoods. Michael and Jessica Walker were described as key players in an operation that had been under investigation for 3 years. According to DEA sources, the article continued, the couple used their legitimate business contacts and social connections to distribute cocaine and methamphetamines to wealthy clients throughout the Chicago area. Walker, who worked as a freelance consultant, allegedly used construction sites as meeting points for drug transactions. A freelance consultant, not an engineer. Another lie. Or maybe Michael had never achieved the dreams we'd talked about in that garage so many years ago. "There's more, Mr. Thompson said gently, handing me another clipping. This one was from the sentencing hearing 9 months later. Local couple sentenced in drug conspiracy case. Michael had received 13 years in federal prison. Jessica got 11 years, apparently for cooperating with prosecutors and providing information about other members of the operation. 13 years. My son had been locked away for 7 years already, with 6 more to go. And Jessica, who'd called us just days ago, had somehow gotten access to a phone to lure us here. "I don't understand," Linda said, her voice barely audible. "Why would she call us? Why bring us here just to show us an empty house?" I was wondering the same thing, but a darker thought was beginning to form in my mind. Jessica had always been manipulative, always able to find angles that served her purposes. If she was still in prison, what could she possibly want from us money? It always came down to money. "Mr. Thompson," I said, "is there a way to find out which prison they're in? I need to see my son." "Well, federal prisoners are in the system online. You could look it up on one of those websites. My grandson showed me how to do it once." We spent the next hour in Mr. Thompson's living room using his computer to search federal prison databases. What we found confirmed our worst fears and answered some of our questions. Michael Thomas Walker was currently incarcerated at Tosti, Venturdorf, Trehaute Federal Correctional Institution, about 40 miles west of Chicago. His earliest possible release date was 6 years from now, assuming good behavior. Jessica Marie Walker was listed at a women's federal prison in Alderson, West Virginia, about 500 miles east. But according to the records, she'd been transferred there only 3 months ago from a facility in Michigan. Michigan, close enough to Detroit that she could have researched us, maybe even driven by our house. Close enough to know exactly what buttons to push to get us to come to Chicago. But we still didn't know why. Linda was crying quietly beside me, and I realized I was crying too. 7 years of wondering why our son had cut us out of his life. 7 years of believing we'd somehow failed as parents, that we'd driven him away with our love and concern. The truth was so much worse. Michael hadn't chosen to leave us. He'd been consumed by something dark and destructive, and Jessica had made sure we never knew about it. She'd used our love for our son as a weapon, keeping us away while she helped destroy his life. "We need to go see him," I said to Linda. "We need to go to that prison and see Michael." She nodded, wiping her eyes with a tissue mister Thompson had provided. "But Larry, what if he doesn't want to see us? What if he's angry that we never tried to find him?" The question that had been haunting me since we'd read that first newspaper article. What if Michael thought we'd abandoned him? What if he believed we'd known about his arrest and chosen not to help? How do you explain to your child that you had no idea they were in prison because the person they married had spent 12 years lying to everyone? As we prepared to leave Mr. Thompson's house, thanking him for his kindness in the most difficult moment of our lives, I made a decision. Whatever we found at that prison, whatever Michael felt about our absence from his life, we were going to face it together. I'd lost 7 years with my son. I wasn't going to lose another day. The drive to Terre Haute felt like the longest 40 miles of my life. Linda sat beside me, clutching the visitor information we'd printed from the prison website. Her hands shook as she read through the regulations. No jewelry, no cell phones, no physical contact beyond a brief embrace at the beginning and end of the visit. We'd spent the night in a cheap motel near the airport, neither of us sleeping much. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that newspaper photo of Michael in handcuffs, the hollow look in his eyes that spoke of a stranger wearing my son's face. "What if he won't see us?" Linda asked for the 11th time as we pulled into the prison parking lot. The facility looked like a concrete fortress, surrounded by razor wire and guard towers. Nothing about it suggested hope or redemption. "Then we'll wait," I said, though my own stomach was churning with doubt. "We'll wait as long as it takes." The visiting process was dehumanizing. We were searched, questioned, and processed like we were the criminals. Our identification was checked multiple times, our backgrounds verified. Finally, after 3 hours of bureaucracy, we were led into a large room filled with plastic tables and chairs. And then I saw him. Michael walked through a door at the far end of the room, and my heart nearly stopped. He was thinner than in the newspaper photo, his dark hair now streaked with gray, though he was only 40 years old. He wore an orange jumpsuit that hung loose on his frame, and his eyes swept the room nervously until they found us. The moment our eyes met, his face crumpled. He stood frozen for several seconds, as if he couldn't believe we were real. Then he started walking towards us slowly at first, then faster. "Dad," his voice was the same, though rougher now. "Dad, is that really you?" The guard allowed us a brief embrace, and I held my son for the first time in 12 years. He felt fragile in my arms, like he might break if I held him too tight. When we separated, tears were streaming down his face. "I can't believe you're here," he whispered as we sat down at one of the plastic tables. "I never thought I'd see you again." Linda reached across the table to take his hand, and I saw him flinch slightly before allowing the contact. Prison had taught him to be wary of human touch. "Michael," Linda said, her voice thick with tears, "we didn't know. We didn't know you were here. If we had known, we would have come immediately." His face showed confusion, then something that looked like hope. "You didn't know. But I thought Jessica said you knew about the arrest. She said you were ashamed of me, that you didn't want anything to do with me anymore." The pieces of Jessica's deception began falling into place like a puzzle from hell. She'd told us Michael wanted space from his family. She'd told Michael we were ashamed and had abandoned him. She'd built a wall of lies that kept us apart for 7 years. "Jessica lied to us," I said, struggling to keep my voice level. "She told us you didn't want to see us anymore, that we were too controlling and needed to give you space to build your own life." Michael stared at us in disbelief. He said, "What, Dad? I tried to call you so many times in those first few years. Every time I was arrested, every time I got out on bail. Jessica always said she'd contacted you, that you didn't want to help." My hands clenched into fists on the table. The depth of Jessica's manipulation was staggering. She'd systematically destroyed our family, while making each of us believe the other had chosen the separation. "Tell us what happened," Linda said gently. "Help us understand how we got here." Michael was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "It started about 2 years after we got married. Jessica was working at a medical clinic, and she started bringing home prescription pills. At first, it was just for stress. She said the job was demanding, and she needed something to help her sleep. I remembered Jessica from those early days of their marriage. Beautiful, charming, ambitious. She'd seemed like the perfect wife for Michael, supportive of his dreams and career. She got me to try them, too. Michael continued, said they'd help with the anxiety I was feeling about work, about trying to establish my engineering practice. At first, it seemed harmless, just something to take the edge off. But it wasn't harmless, Linda said softly. Michael shook his head. Within 7 months, we were both addicted. The pills became the most important thing in our lives. When the prescription sources dried up, Jessica found street dealers. When we couldn't afford street prices, she suggested we start selling to make money. The progression from victims to criminals painted a picture I recognized, but had never wanted to see. Addiction was a disease I'd watched destroy other families in our neighborhood. I just never imagined it could touch ours. I tried to get clean several times. Michael said, every time I'd mention calling you and Mom asking for help, Jessica would talk me out of it. She said, you'd never understand, that you'd judge us and make everything worse. We would have helped, I said firmly. Whatever it took. We would have helped you get clean. I know that now. But at the time, I was so ashamed. The successful engineer's son you'd raised was selling drugs out of his car and shooting up in gas station bathrooms. How do you tell your parents that you've become everything they taught you not to be? The pain in his voice was raw, immediate. This wasn't the abstract regret of someone telling an old story. This was fresh anguish. The wound of a man who'd spent 7 years reliving his mistakes. The worst part, Michael continued, was that I started to believe Jessica's version of events. When you didn't visit or call, I convinced myself that maybe you really had written me off. Maybe I really was beyond redemption. Linda was crying openly now, but she kept hold of Michael's hand. We never stopped loving you. Not for one day. We just didn't know where you were or how to reach you. Jessica made sure of that. Michael said, and for the first time, I heard anger in his voice. She intercepted every attempt I made to contact you, changed our phone numbers without telling me the new ones, moved us to different apartments, and didn't give me the addresses. The systematic nature of Jessica's deception was becoming clear. She hadn't just lied to us. She'd isolated Michael completely, making him dependent on her for every connection to the outside world. Why, I asked, why would she want to keep us apart? Michael's expression darkened. Control. Jessica needed me to believe that she was the only person in the world who cared about me. As long as I thought you'd abandoned me, I wouldn't leave her, no matter how bad things got. But you were arrested together, Linda pointed out. If she loved you, why didn't she try to protect you? Love Michael laughed bitterly. Jessica didn't love me. Mom, I was useful to her. I had skills she needed for the business, connections for my legitimate work that she could exploit. When we got arrested, she made a deal with the prosecutors immediately, gave them information about everyone in our network, including me. The betrayal was complete. Jessica had destroyed our family, led my son into addiction and crime, then abandoned him to save herself when it all fell apart. She testified against me at sentencing. Michael added quietly, told the judge that I was the leader of our operation, that she was just following my orders, got her sentence reduced by 3 years. I felt a rage building in my chest, unlike anything I'd ever experienced. This woman had systematically destroyed my son's life and kept us from helping him. She'd stolen 7 years from our family and was still trying to manipulate us from prison. Michael, I said carefully, Jessica called us 6 days ago. She's the one who brought us to Chicago. His eyes widened in shock. She called you. How's she supposed to be in Alderson? We think she was transferred there recently from a facility in Michigan. She told us you wanted to see us, that you had children and were doing well. Michael's face cycled through confusion, anger, and finally, a kind of weary recognition. She's working an angle. Jessica always has an angle. If she contacted you, it's because she wants something. What could she possibly want from us now? Money for appeals lawyers, probably. Or she might be getting out soon and needs a place to land. Jessica's really good at finding people's weak spots and exploiting them. The manipulation was still continuing even after 7 years of separation. Jessica had used our love for Michael to lure us to Chicago, probably hoping we'd be so grateful to find him. that we'd do whatever she asked. "She's not getting a penny from us," Linda said fiercely, "and she's never getting near this family again." Michael smiled for the first time since we'd sat down. It was weak and uncertain, but it was genuine. "I can't tell you how good it is to hear you say that. For so long, I thought I was completely alone." "You're not alone," I said firmly. "You're our son, and we're going to figure out how to move forward from here." We spent the rest of our visiting time talking about practical matters, Michael's release date, his plans for when he got out, the possibility of him coming to live with us in Detroit while he got back on his feet. But underneath the logistics, something more important was happening. We were rebuilding the connection that Jessica had tried so hard to destroy. With each shared memory, each expression of love and regret, the wall between us crumbled a little more. When visiting time ended and we had to say goodbye, Michael hugged us both tightly. "Thank you for coming," he said. "Thank you for not giving up on me." As we walked back to our car, Linda and I were both emotionally drained, but oddly hopeful. We'd found our son, and despite everything he'd been through, he was still Michael, still the boy who'd worked beside me in the garage, who dreamed of building something lasting. Jessica's lies had kept us apart for 7 years, but they couldn't destroy the fundamental bond between a father and son. Now, we just had to make sure she never got the chance to hurt our family again. 4 days after visiting Michael, Jessica called again. I was in the garage, trying to distract myself by organizing tools, when Linda's voice cut through the afternoon quiet like a siren. "Larry, Larry, come quick. It's her again." I found Linda standing in the kitchen holding the phone like it might bite her. Her face was pale, and I could hear Jessica's voice coming through the speaker, sweet and concerned. "Linda, are you there? I've been so worried about you and Larry. Did you make it to Chicago safely?" I took the phone from Linda's trembling hands. My voice, when I spoke, was ice cold. "We made it. Jessica, we saw the house." There was a pause just long enough for me to know that she was recalculating her approach. When she spoke again, her tone had shifted slightly, becoming more cautious. "Oh, well, I hope you understand about the mix-up with the address. Things have been so complicated lately." "There was no mix-up. Jessica, we know where you are. We know where Michael is. We know everything." The silence stretched longer this time. When Jessica finally responded, the sweetness was gone from her voice, replaced by something harder. "I see. Well, then you know that Michael and I made some mistakes. But Larry, you have to understand we were both struggling. The important thing is that we're trying to make things right now by lying to us for 12 years. By keeping us away from our son while he was destroying his life. I was protecting him." Jessica's voice rose, cracking with what sounded like genuine emotion. "You don't understand what it was like. Michael was so ashamed, so convinced that you'd reject him if you knew the truth. I was trying to spare him that pain." The audacity of it took my breath away. Even now, even caught in her lies, Jessica was trying to paint herself as Michael's protector. "You kept him from getting help," I said. "You kept him addicted and isolated so you could control him. That's not true. But There was less conviction in her voice now. Look, Larry, I know you're angry. You have every right to be. But we can't change the past. What matters now is Michael's future. And there it was. The angle Michael had predicted. Jessica wasn't calling to apologize or explain. She was calling because she wanted something. What do you want? Jessica. Another pause. And when she spoke again, the manipulative sweetness was back in full force. Michael's getting out in 6 years. Larry, 6 years. He's going to need support, guidance, a place to start over. He's going to need family. He has family. He has us. Of course, he does, but he's also going to need financial support. Prison doesn't exactly prepare someone for re-entering society. And there are legal matters to consider. Appeals that could get him out sooner if we had the right representation. Money. Just like Michael had predicted. How much, I asked bluntly. Well, there's a lawyer in New York who specializes in federal appeals. He thinks he could get Michael's sentence reduced by at least 3 years. Maybe more. His retainer is $60,000. $60,000. Jessica was asking for more money than Linda and I had saved in 6 years. And why exactly would we give money to you instead of directly to Michael or his lawyer because I'm still his wife? Larry, legally, I'm his next of kin. I can make decisions about his legal representation that you can't. The claim hit me like a physical blow. In all the shock of discovery, I hadn't considered the legal reality. Jessica was still married to Michael. Despite everything she'd done, she still had legal rights that superseded ours. Besides, Jessica continued, her voice taking on a pleading tone, I want what's best for Michael, too. I know I made mistakes, but I love him. I want him to have a chance at a real life when he gets out. If you love him, why did you testify against him at sentencing? I was trying to save us both. If I hadn't cooperated, we would have gotten much longer sentences. At least this way, we'll both be out while we're still young enough to start over. The rationalization was smooth, practiced. I could hear how Jessica had convinced herself that betraying Michael was actually an act of love. Think about it. Larry, she pressed, $60,000 could give Michael 3 extra years of freedom. 3 years to rebuild his life, to reconnect with his family. Isn't that worth it? I looked at Linda, who was listening to every word with growing horror. We'd never had $60,000 to spare. We were living on Social Security and my modest pension. Even if we had the money, giving it to Jessica felt like rewarding her for destroying our family. I need to think about it, I said finally. Of course, but Larry, don't take too long. Legal appeals have deadlines, and this lawyer is in high demand. If we wait too long, Michael might miss his chance. The pressure tactic was obvious, but effective. Jessica was counting on our desperation to help Michael, our guilt over the lost years to override our common sense. After I hung up, Linda and I sat at our kitchen table in stunned silence. The coffee in our cups grew cold as we processed what Jessica was asking of us. She's still manipulating us, Linda said, finally. Even from prison, she's still finding ways to hurt this family. I nodded, but part of me was torn. What if Jessica was telling the truth about the appeals lawyer? What if $60,000 really could get Michael out 3 years early? Larry, Linda said, reading my thoughts, You can't seriously be considering this. What if it's real? What if we could actually help him get out sooner? Then we'd find a way to help him directly without going through her. We'd hire our own lawyer, do our own research. We wouldn't hand money over to the woman who spent the last decade lying to us. She was right, of course, but the temptation was still there. The chance to fix something, to make up for lost time, to prove to Michael that we'd do anything for him. Over the next few days, I found myself researching federal appeals processes, looking into lawyers who specialized in sentence reductions. What I discovered was sobering. Most appeals failed. The chances of getting a significant sentence reduction were slim, especially for someone who'd already served 7 years of a 13-year sentence. But there were exceptions, cases where new evidence emerged, where prosecutorial misconduct was discovered, where sentencing guidelines had changed. It wasn't impossible. Linda grew increasingly worried as she watched me dive deeper into legal research. She found me one morning at 4 a.m., hunched over my laptop reading case law. "This has to stop," she said, sitting down beside me. "You're making yourself sick over this. What if we're making a mistake? What if there really is a chance to help him? Then we'll help him the right way. We'll visit him again, talk to him about his options. We'll find our own lawyer if that's what it takes. But we will not give money to Jessica." The next day, Jessica called again. This time her tone was more urgent. "Larry, I've been thinking about our conversation. I understand your hesitation. I really do. But I have some news that might change your mind." What news? Michael doesn't know I'm trying to help him with this appeal. He's given up hope, convinced himself that he deserves to serve the full sentence. If you could see him, Larry, if you could see how defeated he's become. Another manipulation, but this one cut deeper because it contained a grain of truth. Michael had seemed resigned during our visit, like he'd accepted that prison was where he belonged. "What are you suggesting?" "I think it would be better if this appeal happens without Michael knowing about it initially. Let the lawyer do his work, and then we can surprise Michael with the good news. Think about how much hope it would give him to know that his family fought for his freedom." The scenario Jessica painted was seductive. Walking into that prison visiting room and telling Michael that we'd found a way to get him out early. Seeing his face light up with hope for the first time in years. But Linda's voice cut through my fantasy. "She's lying again," she said quietly. "Can't you see that she's telling you what you want to hear?" That night, I called the lawyer Jessica had mentioned. His office was closed, but I left a message asking for information about Michael's case. The next morning, he called back. "Mr. Thompson, I understand you're inquiring about Michael Walker. I have to tell you, I've never heard of this case. I certainly haven't been retained to work on any appeals." The lie was so brazen, so easily disproven that it took my breath away. Jessica hadn't just exaggerated or bent the truth. She'd fabricated the entire story. When I told Linda what I'd discovered, she didn't look surprised. She was never going to use that money for Michael's appeal. Linda said she was going to use it for herself, maybe to hire a lawyer for her own case, or to have money waiting when she gets out. I felt like a fool for even considering Jessica's request. But more than that, I felt angry. Angrier than I'd ever been in my 68 years. This woman had destroyed my son's life. stolen 12 years from our family, and now she was trying to scam us out of our life savings, using our love for Michael as bait. When Jessica called that evening for my answer, I was ready. "Jessica," I said, my voice calm and controlled, "I've made my decision." "Oh, wonderful. I knew you'd do the right thing for Michael. Where should I have the lawyer contact you about the payment arrangements? You misunderstood me. My decision is no. We're not giving you any money now or ever." The silence that followed was electric with rage. "You're making a mistake. Larry, you're condemning your own son to 3 extra years in prison because you're too stubborn to trust me. I'm protecting my family from you, just like I should have done 12 years ago. You'll regret this," Jessica said, her voice turning vicious. "When Michael finds out that his own parents chose their money over his freedom, you'll regret this decision for the rest of your life. Michael will never hear that story from you," I said firmly, "because you're never speaking to any of us again." I hung up and immediately blocked her number. Then I called the prison and added Jessica's name to a list of people who were not allowed to contact Michael about our family. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt like I'd made the right choice. Jessica had tried one last time to destroy our family, and she'd failed. Now we could focus on what really mattered, rebuilding our relationship with Michael and making sure he knew he wasn't alone anymore. 3 years passed like pages turning in a book we were finally allowed to read together. Every month, Linda and I made the drive from Detroit to Terre Haute, 7 hours each way, to spend 2 precious hours with Michael in that sterile visiting room. But those visits became the highlight of our lives. The first few months were tentative, careful. We were all learning how to be a family again, navigating around the crater that Jessica's lies had left in our lives. Michael was suspicious of his own hope, afraid to believe that we really wanted him back. Linda and I were walking on eggshells, terrified of saying something that might remind him of the years we'd lost. But gradually, slowly, the walls came down. Michael started telling us about his life in prison. Not the dramatic stories you see in movies, but the quiet realities of institutional life. He'd become a tutor in the education program, helping other inmates get their GEDs. He'd learned to repair computers in the vocational training center. He'd even started attending Narcotics Anonymous meetings, working through the addiction that had derailed his life. "I've been clean for 7 years now," he told us during one visit, his voice carrying a quiet pride I hadn't heard since he was a teenager, longer than I was using. Sometimes I think that's the only good thing that came out of this place. It forced me to get sober. Linda reached across the table and squeezed his hand. Physical contact was limited, but the guards had grown used to seeing us and were less strict about brief touches. "Your father and I have been going to Al-Anon meetings," she said, "learning about addiction, about how to support you when you get out." Michael's eyes filled with tears. "You didn't have to do that." "Yes, we did," I said firmly. "We lost 12 years because we didn't understand what you were going through. We're not losing any more time to ignorance." Those meetings had been hard for us. Sitting in a circle with other families destroyed by addiction, hearing stories that could have been our own if we'd known the truth. But they'd also been healing. We learned that addiction was a disease, not a moral failing. We learned that loving someone with addiction meant setting boundaries while keeping doors open. Most importantly, we learned that recovery was possible. The breakthrough came during our ninth visit, about 7 months after we'd reconnected. Michael had been quiet during most of our conversation, picking at his fingernails the way he used to do as a child when something was bothering him. "Dad," he said suddenly, "I need to tell you something about why I really started using drugs." Linda and I exchanged glances. We'd been careful not to push Michael to share more than he was comfortable with, but we'd both sensed there were deeper layers to his story. It wasn't just peer pressure or curiosity. Michael continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "I was scared, terrified. Actually, scared of what? Son of failing, of not living up to your expectations. You always believed in me so much. Dad, you were so proud when I got into engineering school, so excited about my future. And I was struggling, really struggling." The words came out in a rush, like water through a broken dam. My grades were terrible my last year of college. I was barely going to graduate, let alone get into a good engineering firm. I felt like I was disappointing everyone, especially you. When Jessica offered me those pills, they made everything seem manageable again. The anxiety went away, and I could focus. I felt like someone had punched me in the stomach. My son had started down the path to addiction because he was afraid of disappointing me. "Michael," I said, my voice shaking, "I would never have been disappointed in you for struggling in school. Never. I know that now. But I was 23 and stupid and scared. And Jessica was there telling me that you'd never understand that successful parents like you couldn't relate to failure." Another piece of Jessica's manipulation revealed she'd used Michael's insecurities about my expectations to drive a wedge between us, making him believe that our love was conditional on his success. "Your mother and I love you," I said firmly. "Not your achievements, not your career, not your success. You. We love you exactly as you are. And we always have." Michael broke down completely then, sobbing like the frightened young man he'd been when Jessica first got her claws into him. The other visitors in the room pretended not to notice, giving us what privacy they could in that public space. When visiting time ended that day, something fundamental had shifted. The last barrier between us had crumbled, and Michael finally believed that our love was real and unconditional. The phone calls started after that. Short conversations 3 times a week, limited by prison regulations, but precious beyond measure. Michael would tell us about his classes, his work assignments, his hopes for the future. We'd share news from home, stories about the neighbors, updates on Linda's garden, normal family conversations, the kind we should have been having all along. "I've been thinking about what I want to do when I get out," Michael said during one call. "I don't think I want to go back to engineering. Too much pressure, too many triggers. But I'd like to work with my hands again. Maybe construction or furniture making. You remember that old garage in the backyard?" I asked. "It's still there, waiting for you." The silence on the other end was loaded with emotion. "Really, you kept it. I never took it down. I think I always hoped you'd come back to it someday." That Christmas, we were allowed a special video call. Michael appeared on our computer screen, wearing his orange jumpsuit, but smiling genuinely for the first time in years. Linda had decorated the background of our call with Christmas lights, and I could see Michael's eyes light up at the sight. "It looks just like home," he said. "It is home," Linda replied, "and you'll be here for the next one." Because by then, we'd gotten the news we'd been hoping for. Michael's exemplary behavior in prison, combined with completion of several rehabilitation programs, had earned him early release. He'd be out in 9 months, with 3 years of parole to follow. The real work began then. We spent months preparing for Michael's return, not just emotionally, but practically. We researched halfway houses, job training programs, parole requirements. We baby-proofed our expectations, understanding that Michael's transition back to civilian life would be challenging. The day Michael was released, Linda and I drove to Terre Haute before dawn. We wanted to be the first faces he saw as a free man. When the prison doors opened and Michael walked out carrying a small bag of possessions, I barely recognized him. He'd gained healthy weight during his last year inside. His hair was neatly trimmed, his posture straight, but it was his eyes that showed the biggest change. The hollow, defeated look was gone, replaced by something I'd thought we'd lost forever: hope. The drive back to Detroit was surreal. Michael sat in the passenger seat, staring out the window at the countryside landscape like he'd never seen it before. Every few minutes, he'd reach over and touch my arm or Linda's hand, as if reassuring himself that we were real. "I can't believe I'm actually here," he said as we pulled into our driveway. "I can't believe you waited for me." "We didn't wait," I corrected him. "We just lived our lives, knowing that someday you'd be part of them again." That first month was an adjustment for all of us. Michael slept on our couch, worked part-time at a furniture restoration shop, and attended mandatory parole meetings 3 times a week. He was quiet, careful, still learning how to exist in the world outside prison walls. But gradually he relaxed. He started laughing at my bad jokes again. He helped Linda with her garden, his hands remembering the patience required to nurture growing things. He spent hours in the garage, reacquainting himself with tools he hadn't touched in over a decade. 7 months after his release, Michael found his own apartment. Small, but clean and close enough that he could bike over for Sunday dinners. He'd been promoted to assistant manager at the restoration shop, and his boss was talking about helping him start his own business eventually. "I want to specialize in fixing things that other people throw away," Michael told us over dinner one night. "Furniture that's damaged but not destroyed. There's something satisfying about taking something broken and making it beautiful again." I understood what he meant. We were all learning about restoration, about taking broken things and finding ways to make them whole. The final piece of healing came unexpectedly 19 months after Michael's release. He was helping me organize the garage when he found a box of his childhood photos that Linda had saved. "Look at this," he said, holding up a picture of the 2 of us working in the shop when he was about 11 years old. I remember this day. We were building that bookshelf for my room. I looked at the photo, seeing the concentration on both our faces as we worked side by side. "You know what I remember about that day," I said. "Not the bookshelf. I remember thinking that I was the luckiest father in the world because I got to share something I loved with someone I loved." Michael set the photo down and looked at me with tears in his eyes. "I thought I'd lost that forever. The feeling of being your son." "You never lost it," I said firmly. It was always there, waiting for you to come home. We stood there in the garage, surrounded by the tools and workbenches that had waited patiently for his return. And I realized that Jessica hadn't won after all. She'd stolen years from us, caused immeasurable pain, but she hadn't destroyed the fundamental bond between father and son. Some connections are stronger than lies. Some love survives even the deepest betrayal. Michael is 41 now, rebuilding his life one careful day at a time. He runs his own furniture restoration business, has a small house with a workshop in the back, and visits us every Sunday for dinner. He's been clean for 12 years and talks openly about his addiction with young people who are struggling with the same demons he faced. Jessica was released from prison last year. She tried to contact Michael once through a mutual acquaintance, but he declined to respond. He's moved on, and so have we. Sometimes I think about the 12 years we lost, the grandchildren who might have been, the memories that were stolen from us. But more often, I think about the years we've been given back, the Sunday dinners, the quiet conversations in the garage, the simple miracle of having my son home. Recovery isn't about returning to what was. It's about building something new from what remains. And what remains, I've learned, is always enough. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.